Hi, my friends. This past week, we completed the longest Torah portion in our sacred scroll, Parashat Nasso. And in it, we encounter one of the Torah's more unusual spiritual paths, the Nazirite vow. Now, in Hebrew, Nazir comes from a root that means to separate or to abstain. The Torah teaches us that in Numbers chapter 6, verse 2, when a man or woman explicitly utters a Nazirite vow to set themselves apart for the eternal, it goes on to say what that involves. Notice a man or a woman, unusual, open to all humans, regardless of gender. Now, the Nazirite accepts three restrictions: no wine or grapes or any intoxicant, no cutting of the hair, and no contact with the dead. At first glance, it sounds quite extreme, really almost monastic. In fact, if you heard the word Nazir in Israel today, that speaker would most likely be referring to a monk or a nun in an Orthodox Christian faith. It feels almost antisocial, perhaps a selfish vow to take. Why would any ordinary Jew ever want to do this? Well, I can share with you personally that back in the year 2000, I was living in Peterborough, Ontario. I was on my own with 4 children, and I was wondering how to reclaim my self-identity and vision of where I was going next. I was studying Judaism. It seems I've been studying Judaism for the majority of my life. I learned at this time of year from our Torah about the Nazirite vow, and I wondered, did anyone still do this? I learned that there were options to take the vow for either 30, 60, or 90 days. And at the time, I'd been hired to lead High Holy Days services that fall in Sault Ste. Marie, a northern town. And that was 90 days away, so I decided to take that vow. I hoped that it would help prepare me for the mental and spiritual space I needed to lead a congregation on my own through Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Now, Judaism is not generally a religion of withdrawal. We sanctify ordinary life. We bless wine. We celebrate weddings. We gather for meals. We care for the dead, and we comfort the mourners. We do not usually separate ourselves from the world in order for ourselves to become holy. Actually, quite the opposite. Judaism insists that holiness is found inside life. So why would the Torah create this category for the Nazirite at all? Nachmanides, the Ramban, medieval commentator, suggests that the Nazirite temporarily elevates themselves to a state of unusual holiness. The Torah even describes the Nazirite with language that is usually reserved for a sacred object. Kol yamei nizro kadosh hu la'Adonai. Throughout their term as a Nazirite, they are consecrated to God. And yet, the Talmud is ambivalent on this. In fact, in Tractate Ta'anit, Rabbi Elazar calls the Nazirite a sinner for denying themselves wine. If God created the world to be enjoyed with gratitude, why would someone refuse its blessings? So which is it? Is a Nazirite a saint or a sinner? A holy person or an extremist? Well, like most multiple choice questions, when in doubt, choose answer E, all of the above. The Nazirite is not meant to be a permanent, forever identity. It is a temporary spiritual intervention. Sometimes our ordinary lives can become spiritually noisy, just too busy. We can lose ourselves in habit, in distraction, excess, grief, or numbness, And sometimes we need boundaries strong enough to help us hear our souls again, hear that still, small voice inside us. The Nazarite says, I need to step back in order to step forward. I need less stimulation so I can recover attention. I need discipline so I can remember my purpose. In that sense, the Nazarite could be seen as something deeply modern. You know, today, people take intentional breaks from social media. They do a dry January. They go on silent retreats. They unplug from technology. They simplify their lives. Not because pleasure is evil, but because constant consumption can make us forget who we are. The Nazarite vow may be the Torah's ancient recognition that human beings periodically need intentional restraint. Let's take a look at what the Nazarite gives up. First, wine and any grape products. Now, wine in Judaism is usually sacred. We make kiddush over wine. We celebrate with wine. In Psalm 104, it says, wine gladdens the human heart. So abstaining from wine is not about rejecting joy. It's about learning whether that joy has become dependency. Can I celebrate without excess? Can I sit with discomfort without needing to escape it? Can I be present without numbing or distracting myself? The Nazarite confronts these questions quite honestly. The second restriction is about hair. The Nazarite lets their hair grow wild and untouched. Now, hair in the ancient world often represented identity, status, and self-presentation. By refusing to cut it, the Nazarite relinquishes control over their appearance. They become visibly different. There's vulnerability in that. Now, most of us today spend enormous energy managing how others see us. We curate ourselves constantly, professionally, socially, digitally. The Nazarite stops curating. The growing hair becomes an outward sign of the inward work, a visible reminder that transformation takes time. And the third restriction, avoiding contact with the dead. This is perhaps the most difficult restriction because caring for the dead is ordinarily considered a sacred obligation in Judaism. But here too, perhaps the Torah recognizes that grief can consume a person. Death has gravity. Mourning someone changes us. The Nazarite temporarily steps away from death in order to focus completely on life, on discipline and spiritual clarity. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik once distinguished between fate and destiny. Fate is what happens to us, and destiny, how we respond. The Nazarite refuses to drift passively through life. The vow is a declaration. My life will not simply happen to me. I will shape it intentionally. And yet, importantly, unlike the role of the Levites, the Nazarite vow ends. And that may be the Torah's deepest wisdom of all. The goal is not permanent separation from the world. The goal is teshuvah, return. After the vow, the Nazarite re-enters ordinary life. They drink wine again. They cut their hair. They return to community. Because Judaism ultimately does not ask us to escape the world. It asks us to re-enter it transformed. The highest Jewish ideal is not the monk on the mountaintop. It's the person who learns how to bring holiness into their everyday life, into their business ethics, into their marriage, into their parenting, into their friendship, into their community, and to acts of kindness. The Nazarite is a spiritual reset, not a permanent destination. And perhaps that is why this passage appears in Parashat Nasso, a portion deeply concerned with order, responsibility, and communal life. The Torah understands that community is built not only by laws and structures, but by individuals capable of inner discipline. Well, I made it through my 90 days of this vow, and it did bring me a deeper connection to my spiritual path. It made me more conscious and careful of my drinking habits. It prepared me to lead others in prayer. Every one of us has moments when we need our own version of a Nazarite vow, not necessarily giving up wine or growing our hair, but perhaps by turning off the noise, stepping back from relentless consumption, creating boundaries, practicing restraint, recovering our attention, remembering what matters. The question is not whether we become Nazarites. Literally, the question is, what practices will help each of us reclaim our souls? And equally important, how do we return from those practices to be more present, more compassionate, more awake to the people around us? The Nazarite withdraws temporarily, not because ordinary life is unholy, but because ordinary life matters so much that it deserves our full and conscious presence. And perhaps that is why the Nazarite path exists at all, to remind us as ordinary Jews that sometimes life needs a reset, a reboot, a break from the ordinary. This is the practice of spiritual self-care. Like Shabbat, each week when we are blessed with an opportunity to elevate a day that is different from our weekly activities, it allows us to enter a new week refreshed and ready to serve. And this, my friends, is how we are blessed.